Poor man found something unbelievable in the abandoned farm's well. Thomas Carter Wilson had been out of work for 6 months when he decided to visit for the first time the farm he had inherited from his grandfather. At 52, he never imagined those 15 acres of dry land in the interior of New Mexico could represent anything more than another expense. It was while starting to clean the old well that Thomas made the discovery that would change everything. For decades, that circular stone hole had been covered by dry branches, leaves, and overgrown brush. But when he removed all the accumulated dirt, he found something that left him speechless. "My God," murmured Thomas, kneeling at the edge of the well. The water was crystal clear like he had never seen. In the midst of a drought that had plagued the region for 2 years, when even the largest reservoirs were cracked and empty, there was a well full of pure water that shone under the sun like a blue mirror. Thomas removed his faded straw hat and ran his hand through his graying hair. It didn't make sense. The entire region was suffering the most severe drought in decades. The neighbors had to get water from tanker trucks that came from the city once a week. How could so much clean water exist right there? He grabbed an old gourd he found on the farmhouse porch and went down to the well. The water was cool, with a pure taste he hadn't experienced in years. Thomas drank a few gourds, feeling the icy water go down his dry throat. When he returned home in the late afternoon, Thomas found Sarah, his wife of 25 years, preparing dinner with the little water still left in the tank. "How was it at the farm?" she asked, not looking up from the pot. "Sarah, you won't believe what I found there." She finally looked at him, noticing something different in her husband's expression. Thomas was never a man of many words, but his eyes shone in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. "What is it?" "There's a well there full of clean water. More water than I've ever seen in one source." Sarah stopped stirring the beans and stared at him suspiciously. "Thomas, don't make up stories. The whole region is dry. Even the Johnson's well has no water. I know how crazy it sounds, but it's true. Tomorrow you come with me to see." That night, Thomas could barely sleep. He kept thinking about how that water got there, how long it had existed, and especially if it could mean some change in the hard life they led. Since the cotton processing factory closed, he couldn't find steady work. He took odd jobs when they appeared, but with the drought, even odd jobs became scarce. The next day, Sarah went with him to the farm, bringing along Billy, their 8-year-old youngest son. The boy had been suffering from respiratory problems since he was little. The dust from the drought and the heat made him cough a lot, especially at night. When they reached the well, Sarah was silent for a few minutes, observing that sight which seemed impossible amidst the parched landscape. "I don't believe it," she whispered. Billy ran to the edge of the well, fascinated by the reflection of the sky in the water. "Dad, can I drink?" Thomas looked at Sarah, who just nodded affirmatively. The boy drank a whole gourd, then another. "It's cold," exclaimed Billy, smiling in a way his parents hadn't seen in ages. They spent the whole morning exploring the farm, but always returned to the well. Thomas noticed there were some carved stones at the edge, with symbols he couldn't understand. They looked very old. "Did your grandfather ever talk about this well?" asked Sarah. "Never. He died when I was a child, and my father always said this land was good for nothing." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. The following week, something extraordinary happened. Billy, who used to wake up several times during the night because of his cough, slept through the entire night without a sign of respiratory discomfort. Sarah thought it was a coincidence, but when the pattern repeated for 3 nights in a row, she began to wonder. "Have you noticed anything different about Billy?" she asked Thomas during breakfast. "Now that you mention it, he didn't cough even once yesterday, nor the day before, nor the day before that." They looked at each other, thinking the same thing, but without the courage to say it out loud. It seemed too absurd. "Do you think it could have something to do with the water?" Thomas finished the sentence she couldn't complete. "I don't know, Sarah, but ever since we went there, he's been different." Sarah had also noticed something in herself. The joint pains, which had plagued her for years, especially in her hands, seemed to have lessened considerably. She could do household chores without constant pauses to stretch her sore fingers. Thomas decided to run a test. He filled some bottles with water from the well and brought them home without telling anyone what he was doing. Over the following days, he served only that water to the family. The results were impossible to ignore. Billy not only stopped coughing but seemed more energetic and had better color. Sarah mentioned she felt less tired and her joint pains had practically disappeared. Even Thomas noticed that his digestion, which had always been poor, had improved remarkably. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," he said one afternoon while she was sewing a pair of Billy's torn pants. "Go ahead." "I've been bringing water from that well home. All the water we've been drinking comes from there." Sarah stopped sewing and stared at him. "Do you think that explains—" "I don't know what explains it, but there's something in that water." They fell silent, processing the information. If the well water really had some kind of special property, this was far beyond what they could understand. "We can't tell anyone about this," Sarah finally said. "Why not?" "Because people will think we're crazy. And if it's true, Thomas, imagine if everyone finds out." She was right. If the news spread, the property would be overrun by desperate people, and they didn't know if the water would last, or if it was really safe, or if there was some natural explanation for all of it. But a few days later, something happened that made it impossible to keep the secret. Mrs. Dorothy, their 68-year-old neighbor, who lived about 2 miles away, showed up at their house one Sunday morning. She looked visibly worn out and was walking with difficulty. "Good morning, Mrs. Dorothy," Sarah greeted her. "Are you all right?" "Oh, my dear, I'm suffering so much with this diabetes. The medicine is too expensive. I can't afford it properly anymore. I'm here to see if you might have a little rock sugar to lend me. The doctor told me to stop eating sweets, but I just can't." Sarah felt her heart tighten. Mrs. Dorothy was a widow and lived alone on a minimal pension. She often went through hardships she didn't tell anyone about. "Of course we do. Have a seat. I'll go get it." While Sarah went to get the sugar, Thomas observed Mrs. Dorothy. She was visibly thinner and paler than the last time he had seen her. The diabetes was clearly out of control. When Sarah returned with the package of sugar, she served a glass of water for Mrs. Dorothy, who drank it with pleasure. "My, what delicious water you have. It's so cool." Thomas and Sarah exchanged a nervous glance. "It's normal water," replied Sarah, trying to sound natural. "No, this water has something different. It has a nice taste, you know. And I drink water from all over." Mrs. Dorothy stayed a few more minutes chatting and then left. But when she walked out, Thomas and Sarah were worried. The neighbor had noticed something different about the water, even without knowing where it came from. "What if she starts to get suspicious?" asked Sarah. "Sarah, I've been thinking about something. Mrs. Dorothy is suffering so much with this illness. If the water really helps—" "Thomas, are you thinking of telling her?" "I don't know, but she's a good person, and she needs it so much." Sarah was torn. Mrs. Dorothy had always been a helpful neighbor and had helped a lot when Billy was born, but telling the secret to one person meant it would no longer be a secret. 3 days later, Mrs. Dorothy appeared again. This time, she was even more frail. "My dears, sorry to bother you again, but do you think you might have a little more of that water? Ever since I drank some here on Sunday, I felt better. It might sound silly, but it's true." Thomas looked at Sarah, who after a few seconds of hesitation, nodded affirmatively. "Mrs. Dorothy, sit here for a minute. We need to tell you something." And so, Thomas told the whole story of the well to Mrs. Dorothy. She listened in silence, her eyes wide with surprise. "Are you saying this water cures?" "We don't know if it cures," explained Sarah, "but it does something. Billy stopped coughing, my pains went away, and Thomas's digestion is good." Mrs. Dorothy was silent for a while, processing the information. "And do you think it could help with my diabetes?" "We don't know," admitted Thomas, "but if you want to try, I do. I have nothing to lose anyway." Thomas went to the property to fetch more water for Mrs. Dorothy. He filled 2 large bottles and explained that she should drink only that water for the next few days. "And Mrs. Dorothy," Thomas added before she left, "could you please not tell anyone? We still don't really understand what's happening." "Don't worry, my dear. I won't tell a soul." A week later, Mrs. Dorothy returned with tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. "My dears, you won't believe it. I went to check my glucose at the pharmacy yesterday. The pharmacist had to measure it 3 times because he didn't believe the result." "What do you mean?" asked Sarah. "It's normal. For the first time in 5 years, my glucose is in the numbers the doctor always wanted." Thomas and Sarah looked at each other, scared and moved at the same time. "I don't know how to thank you," continued Mrs. Dorothy, "but I can't stay silent about this. There are a lot of people suffering around here." "Mrs. Dorothy, please," Sarah pleaded. "We still don't understand what's happening. If everyone knows—" "I understand your concern, but John from the ceramics shop is having trouble with his legs. Grace has blood pressure problems. Old Walter can barely walk anymore because of his back pain. How can I see these people suffering and not say anything?" It was an impossible dilemma. How to deny help to people who were suffering, but at the same time how to open the property to everyone without understanding the consequences. "Let's do this," proposed Thomas after thinking hard. "You can only tell John, Grace, and Walter, but ask them not to tell anyone else for now. We need to understand this situation better before it spreads." Mrs. Dorothy agreed, and in the following days, John, Grace, and Walter began discreetly visiting the property. Thomas would personally take them to the well, always asking for secrecy. The results continued to be surprising. John, who suffered from varicose veins and leg pain, soon could walk longer distances without discomfort. Grace saw her blood pressure stabilize in a way she hadn't for years, and Walter, whose back pain prevented him from working, was able to move normally again. But keeping a secret in a small town is almost impossible. The first person to notice something strange was happening was Dr. Jonathan, the doctor who visited the town once a week. During his appointments, he began to notice that some of his chronic patients were showing unexplained improvements. "Mrs. Dorothy, your test results are impressive," he commented during a checkup. "What changes did you make to your diet or medication?" "Oh, doctor, I didn't change a thing." "Are you sure? These results are very good for someone who had uncontrolled diabetes just a few months ago." Mrs. Dorothy grew nervous, but managed to keep the secret. The same happened with Grace and Walter. Dr. Jonathan began to suspect they were lying about not having changed their treatment. "You all are doing something different," he insisted. "These improvements aren't natural." It was then that Grace, under pressure and afraid she was doing something wrong, ended up telling him about the well water. Dr. Jonathan initially didn't believe the story, but when 3 different patients told similar versions of the same story, he began to take the situation seriously. "I need to see this well," he said to Grace. "Oh, doctor, but Thomas asked us to keep it secret. He doesn't want it to spread." "Grace, if this water really has medicinal properties, this is very serious. It might contain substances that are beneficial, but it could also have substances that are harmful. As a doctor, I need to investigate." Grace was in a terrible dilemma. She didn't want to betray the trust of Thomas and Sarah, but she also didn't want to disobey the doctor. That same afternoon, Dr. Jonathan showed up at Thomas's house. "Good afternoon, Thomas. May I speak with you?" Thomas, who was fixing a fence in the yard, immediately grew tense. He had noticed strange activity in town over the last few days and suspected the secret was leaking. "Good afternoon, Doctor. Please come in." Dr. Jonathan was a man in his 50s, a doctor trained in the capital who had decided to work in the countryside. He was respected in the region and known for his honesty. "Thomas, some of my patients told me an interesting story about a well with special water. Do you know anything about that?" Thomas sighed. He knew this moment would come sooner or later. "Doctor, have a seat here. I'll tell you everything." Thomas recounted the whole story from the beginning: the discovery of the water, the improvements in his family, the neighbors who were helped. Dr. Jonathan listened to everything attentively, asking a few technical questions. "Thomas, I understand your concern about keeping this a secret, but from a medical standpoint, this is very serious. If this water really has therapeutic properties, it needs to be properly studied. Do you think it could be harmful?" "I don't know. That's why I need to investigate. Will you allow me to see this well?" Thomas had no way to refuse. Dr. Jonathan was an authority in the region, and if he wanted to, he could create serious problems for the family. "Of course, Doctor. Tomorrow morning I'll take you there." The next day, Dr. Jonathan accompanied Thomas to the property. When he saw the well, he was impressed by the visual quality of the water. "It really is very clean water," he commented, kneeling at the edge and observing. "And you said it's always been like this?" "Ever since I cleaned the well, yes. But I don't know how it was before because it was all covered up." Dr. Jonathan collected some water samples in sterile vials he had brought. "Thomas, I'm going to send these samples for analysis at a lab in the capital. In a few days we'll have a better idea of this water's composition. And in the meantime? In the meantime, it would be best not to let more people drink it until we know if it's safe." Thomas felt his chest tighten. How could he deny water to Mrs. Dorothy and the other neighbors who were benefiting? "Doctor, but they're getting so much better." "I know, Thomas, and that's precisely what worries me. Such rapid improvements could mean there are very active substances in the water. And active substances can be beneficial in the short term, but harmful in the long term." Thomas returned home heavy-hearted, knowing he would have to give the bad news to his neighbors. But when he arrived, he found a situation that complicated things even further. Sarah was in the kitchen talking to a woman he didn't know. "Thomas, this is Lucy. She came from Roswell. Roswell was over 100 kilometers away." Thomas felt a shiver. "What do you mean she came from Roswell?" Lucy, a woman of about 40 with a tired appearance, explained, "Mr. Thomas, my mother is a friend of Grace. She told me about the water that is helping sick people. My 5-year-old daughter has had kidney problems since she was born. The doctors say she will need a transplant. I brought her here to see if this water can help." Thomas looked at Sarah, who was visibly moved by the woman's story. "Where is your daughter?" "She's outside, afraid to come in." Thomas went out and saw a small girl, thin and pale, leaning against her mother's old pickup truck. "Hi, little one. What's your name?" "Victoria." The child spoke softly, looking at the ground. Thomas felt his heart tighten. The girl was visibly ill. "Victoria, would you like to play a little here at the ranch?" She nodded timidly. Thomas was torn between Dr. Jonathan's recommendations and the sick child in front of him. How could he deny help to a child? "Lucy, I'm going to be honest with you. A doctor was here today and asked me not to give the water to anyone until we have some test results." Lucy's face turned to despair. "Please, Mr. Thomas, I came from so far away. My daughter is suffering so much. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing." Thomas looked at the girl and couldn't maintain his refusal. "All right, let's go over there. But you understand that I can't guarantee anything, right?" Lucy nodded vigorously, taking her daughter by the hand. At the well, Victoria drank several gourds of water. Thomas explained to Lucy that it would be good for her to stay in the area for a few days to monitor the effects, and he offered her the old house on the ranch to stay in. Over the next 3 days, something happened that Thomas would never forget. The girl's color gradually returned. She began to play, to run, to smile in a way her mother hadn't seen in months. On the 3rd day, she was completely different. Lucy cried with emotion. "Mr. Thomas, I don't know how to thank you. My daughter is a different person." "But Lucy, you can't go around telling people, okay? We are still trying to understand this situation." "I understand. But Mr. Thomas, how can I pretend this didn't happen? How can I lie to my daughter's doctor when he asks what changed?" It was an impossible question to answer. Thomas knew the story would spread. It was only a matter of time, and it spread much faster than he imagined. When Lucy returned to Roswell, she couldn't keep the secret. She told her family, who told friends, who told other friends. Within a week, Thomas began receiving people from various towns in the region. The situation became unsustainable when Dr. Jonathan returned with the test results. "Thomas, the results are very interesting," he said, sitting on the house's porch. "The water has a very rich and balanced mineral composition. It has magnesium, calcium, potassium, and other minerals in quantities that could really explain therapeutic effects. So it's not harmful? From a chemical composition standpoint, no. In fact, it's excellent water, but Thomas, there's a problem. What? According to the reports, this water has characteristics similar to known medicinal thermal waters worldwide. This means it could have significant commercial value. Thomas didn't fully understand the concern. And what's the problem with that? The problem is that if this goes public, your life will change completely. Companies will want to buy your land, the government may want to regulate its use, people will come from everywhere. Are you sure you're ready for that? Thomas felt the world spin. He hadn't thought about these consequences. And if I don't want to sell? You won't be able to avoid the pressure. When a discovery of this kind becomes public, the forces that move into play are much bigger than one family can control. That night, Thomas talked at length with Sarah about the situation. We could simply cap the well again, she suggested, and abandon everyone who's being helped. Victoria, Mrs. Dorothy, old Walter. Thomas, if we can't control this, we'll lose everything. Our peace, our family, maybe even our land. It was true. Thomas was seeing that the situation was growing beyond their ability to manage. New people showed up every day. Some came with simple problems, others with serious illnesses. Some were humble and respectful, others were demanding and rude. The following week, the situation worsened drastically when a modern pickup truck with 3 men in suits arrived at the farm. "Mr. Thomas Carter Wilson?" asked the tallest one. "That's me. My name is Richard Brennan. I represent the company Pure Waters of America. We've come to talk to you about a business opportunity." Thomas felt his stomach turn. It was exactly what Dr. Jonathan had predicted. "What kind of opportunity?" "Mr. Thomas, we know about the exceptional quality of the water on your property. We are prepared to make a very generous offer to purchase the land." "I'm not interested in selling." Richard smiled in a way that didn't seem friendly at all. "Mr. Thomas, with all due respect, I believe you don't fully understand the situation. This water has the potential to generate millions in revenue. You don't have the resources or the knowledge to properly exploit it." "And you do?" "We do. We are a company specialized in mineral waters. We have licenses, distribution infrastructure, technical knowledge. We can turn this spring into a prosperous business that will benefit the entire region." Thomas didn't like the tone of the conversation. "How did you find out about the water?" "News travels, Mr. Thomas. And when it comes to a discovery of this caliber, information reaches us quickly." One of the other men who had been silent until then stepped forward. "Mr. Thomas, our offer is $500,000 for the entire property. It's much more than this land is normally worth." Thomas almost choked. It was more money than he would earn in 10 years of work. "I need to talk with my family." "Of course, but don't take too long to decide. Other companies are also learning about this, and not all of them are as generous as we are." After the men left, Thomas paced around the house like a caged animal. $500,000 would solve all the family's financial problems. Billy could study at a better school. Sarah could stop worrying about money. They could have a decent life. But something about those men's attitude deeply bothered him. That night, while having dinner with the family, Billy asked a question that caught him off guard. "Dad, is it true you're going to sell the farm?" "Who told you that?" "I heard some boys at school talking. They say there are outsiders wanting to buy our land." Thomas looked at Sarah, who seemed as worried as he was. "Billy, we're thinking about it, but nothing's been decided yet. But if you sell, what will happen to the water that helps people?" It was a child's question, but it went straight to the point that bothered Thomas the most. If he sold to that company, the water would probably become an expensive product that simple people like Mrs. Dorothy would never be able to afford. "I don't know, son." "Dad, remember when you taught me that when we can help someone, we should help?" Thomas felt his heart tighten. His son's words echoed in his head all night. The next day, Dr. Jonathan appeared again, but this time he was accompanied by a woman Thomas didn't know. "Thomas, this is Dr. Jennifer. She's a geologist from the State University. I asked her to come take a look at the well." Dr. Jennifer was a woman of about 50, with a serious but kind appearance. "Mr. Thomas, Dr. Jonathan told me about the discovery. From a scientific point of view, this is very interesting. Do you think there's an explanation? There probably is, yes, but I need to do some more detailed studies. Will you allow me to do some small excavations around the well? Thomas agreed, and during the following days, Dr. Jennifer worked on the site, taking measurements and collecting samples of the soil and rock around the well. Meanwhile, the external pressure kept increasing. The company Pure Waters of America came back twice, always increasing the offer. On the third visit, they offered $800,000. "Mr. Thomas, this is our final offer," said Richard with a more threatening tone. "We advise you to accept, because things could get more complicated if you keep resisting." "How so complicated?" "Well, Mr. Thomas, you don't have licenses for commercial exploitation of this water. You are allowing people to consume it without sanitary authorization. If someone reports it to the proper authorities..." Thomas understood the threat. They were saying that if he didn't sell voluntarily, they would create legal problems to force him to sell. That night, Thomas hardly slept. He was being pressured from all sides: the company that wanted to buy the land, the people who kept coming to fetch the water, the worry about possible legal problems. It was then that Dr. Jennifer returned with information that changed the whole perspective of the situation. "Mr. Thomas, I have good news," she said, sitting on the porch. "I managed to understand where this water comes from." "How so?" "There is a very deep underground spring that feeds this well. The water passes through layers of specific rocks that provide natural filtration and add the minerals that give it the therapeutic properties." "And is that rare?" "Very rare. But the most interesting thing is that I found some old documents in the university library. This region was already known by the indigenous people as a source of medicinal water. There are records that last century, people came from far away to be treated here." Thomas was surprised. "My grandfather never told me any of that." He probably didn't know. The records are very old and were lost in the archives, but there is official documentation that this site was recognized as a source of medicinal water by the state government in 1943. And what does that mean today? It means you have specific legal rights to this spring. And more importantly, it means no company can simply take your land. This spring has legal protection as a natural heritage of the state. Thomas felt an enormous relief. He had finally found a way to protect himself from the pressure of the companies. "And about the people who come to fetch the water?" "Well, that's more complicated. Ideally, you would need some licenses to allow public consumption. But considering this source has historical recognition and the studies prove the water is safe, I think we can regularize the situation." "How?" "I know some people in the state government who work with natural heritage preservation. I can talk to them about creating a program for sustainable use of this source." It was the first time in weeks that Thomas saw a light at the end of the tunnel. But a few days later, something happened that almost destroyed all hope. Thomas was working on the farm when he saw strange activity near the well. There were 3 trucks from a drilling company he didn't recognize. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted, running toward the trucks. A man in a yellow hard hat approached him. "Sir, we're from the company Drilling Thompson. We've come to do some surveying in the area." "Who told you to survey my land?" The man looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we have a permit here." He showed a paper that Thomas couldn't quite understand, but it had several official stamps. "This isn't right. This land is mine." "Sir, I just follow orders. If there's a problem, you have to resolve it with whoever issued the permit." Thomas grabbed the paper and ran home to show Sarah. "Sarah, look at this." Sarah read the document several times but couldn't understand it either. "Thomas, this is very strange. How can they give permission to survey our land without talking to us?" "I'm going to call Dr. Jonathan." Thomas went to town to use the pharmacy phone and managed to speak with Dr. Jonathan, who immediately offered to help. "Thomas, this smells of irregularity. I'll call Dr. Jennifer and a lawyer I know. Don't let them drill anything until we understand this situation better." Thomas returned to the farm determined to stop any drilling. When he got there, he found the workers already setting up the equipment. "Stop! You can't do this. Sir, we have a permit. If you have a problem, you have to resolve it in court. I won't let you destroy my property." The argument was getting tense when Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Jennifer arrived, accompanied by a lawyer. Sir, I am Dr. Michael, an attorney. Can you show me this drilling permit? The company supervisor handed over the documents. Dr. Michael analyzed them quickly and made some calls. Mr. Thomas, there's something very strange here. This permit was issued based on a request alleging that you sold the mineral rights to your property. But I never sold anything. I know. That's why this permit is fraudulent. I will request a court injunction to stop any activity until we clarify the situation. The drilling supervisor grew nervous. But we have a paid contract to do this work. Who do you have a contract with? Asked Dr. Michael. With the company Pure Waters of America. Thomas felt his anger rise. It was the same company that had tried to buy his land. So you were hired by a company that doesn't own this land to drill without the owner's permission. Do you know that's a crime? The supervisor turned pale. Sir, we didn't know there was any irregularity. We'll stop work immediately. After the drilling company left, Dr. Michael explained the situation to Thomas. Thomas, what's happening here is an attempted land grab. They're using false documents to try and take your property by force. But how can they do that? Because you're a simple person without the resources to defend yourself properly, they're betting you won't be able to fight a big company in court. And can I? Now you can. I will represent you in this case free of charge. And with the documents Dr. Jennifer discovered, proving the historical value of this spring, we have very strong arguments. Thomas felt a mix of relief and worry. He was getting help to defend himself, but he also realized the problem was much bigger than he imagined. Dr. Michael, and in the meantime, what happens to the people who come to get the water? Well, that's another problem. Technically, you need permits to allow public use of the water, but I will file a request to have this spring recognized as a public interest heritage site. If we can achieve this, the state itself will help regularize the situation. In the following days, Thomas lived through one of the most stressful phases of his life. Besides dealing with the legal issues, he kept receiving people who came from far away seeking the water. Some arrived in very serious condition, and he didn't have the heart to deny help. That's when something happened that deeply affected him. A woman arrived at the ranch carrying a child of about 2 years old who was visibly very ill. "Please, Mr. Thomas," the woman pleaded. "My son has cancer. The doctors said there's nothing more they can do. I heard about the water and came from New York." Thomas looked at the child and felt his heart tighten. The boy was pale and thin, clearly suffering a great deal. "Ma'am, I will help, but I want you to understand that I don't know if the water will work for this, and there are complicated legal issues now." "I understand, but I can't go back home without trying." Thomas accommodated the woman and the boy in the ranch house. For 3 days the child drank the water from the well. On the first day there was no visible change. On the second, he seemed to have a bit more energy. On the third day, to everyone's surprise, the boy was playing and smiling. The mother cried with emotion. "Mr. Thomas, I don't know how to thank you. My son hasn't smiled in months." "Ma'am, I'm happy to see him better. But you understand, this could be temporary, right? I'm not a doctor, and I can't guarantee anything." "I understand, but at least now I have hope." When the woman left, Thomas kept thinking about the responsibility that was on his shoulders. If the water really could help people in serious cases like that, how could he deny access because of bureaucratic issues? But a few days later, Dr. Michael brought worrying news. "Thomas, I received a summons from the court. The company Pure Waters of America is suing you for irregular commercial exploitation of water resources." "How so?" "They are claiming that you are selling water without a license and putting public health at risk." "But I never sold anything. I only let people drink." "I know, Thomas, but they have photos of people paying you." Thomas was confused. "What photos?" Dr. Michael showed some photographs that had been attached to the lawsuit. In the images, you could see people handing money to Thomas. "Thomas, did you receive money from anyone?" "No. I mean, some people insisted on giving a little help for gas, for food, things like that. But I never charged anything. Unfortunately, the photos make it look like you charge for the water." Thomas realized he had fallen into a trap. The company had sent people pretending to be in need, offered money that he accepted only to help with expenses, and then used it against him. "Dr. Michael, what do I do now?" "We will defend ourselves. But Thomas, you'll have to stop receiving people for a while. Until we resolve this situation, any move can be used against you." Thomas felt his world collapse. How was he going to explain to the people who were being helped that they couldn't come anymore? How was he going to deny help to those who were suffering? That night, Sarah found Thomas sitting on the porch looking at the starry sky. "Thomas, are you okay?" "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe it would have been better to have sold the land after all. At least we wouldn't have all these problems." "You don't really think that?" "Yes, I do. Just look where we've ended up. Our lawsuit, outsiders trying to steal our land. I can't help anyone anymore." Sarah sat beside him. "Thomas, remember when we discovered the water? How happy you were. And when Billy got better. And when Mrs. Dorothy cried with happiness." "I remember." "Well then, those things really happened. We really helped people. That can't be wrong. But look at the price we're paying. Thomas, your grandfather didn't leave you this land for no reason. Perhaps he knew something about the water. Perhaps this is our family's destiny." Thomas looked at his wife and saw a determination in her eyes that he hadn't expected. "Do you think we should keep fighting?" "I think we don't have a choice. If we give up now, these companies will take everything and turn the water into a business only for the rich. And then, who will help people like Mrs. Dorothy?" It was true. Thomas realized he wasn't just fighting for his land, but for the right of ordinary people to have access to that water. The next day he sought out Dr. Michael with a new resolve. "Doctor, I want to fight, but I need to know, do we have a chance of winning?" "Thomas, to be honest with you, it won't be easy. The company has a lot of money and experienced lawyers, but we have a few points in our favor." "Which ones?" "First, the historical documents that Dr. Jennifer found. Second, the fact that they tried to use fraudulent documentation. Third, we have witnesses that you never charged for the water. And is that enough?" "I don't know, but Thomas, there's one thing that could help our cause a lot." "What?" "If we can mobilize public opinion in our favor. If the people in the region understand that you are fighting for their right to access the water, that could create political pressure to resolve the situation." Thomas didn't understand much about politics, but he understood community. "What do I have to do?" "First, let's organize a meeting with all the people who were helped by the water. They can give testimonies about the benefits they received. And then we go to the press. A story about a simple man fighting a big company to keep public access to medicinal water might interest journalists." Thomas was nervous about the idea of talking to journalists, but he agreed. The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at Thomas's house. More than 50 people showed up, from close neighbors to people who had come from other towns. Mrs. Dorothy was one of the first to speak. "Folks, I'm here alive and healthy because of Thomas and this water. Before, my diabetes was killing me slowly. Today, I'm better than I was 5 years ago." John the Potter also gave his testimony. "I couldn't work anymore because of the pain in my legs. Today I work normally. This changed my life." One by one, people told their stories of improvement. Thomas was moved to realize how many lives had been touched by the discovery of the water. "Folks," he finally said, "you know I'm facing legal problems because of this water. There's a company trying to take our land." "We won't let them," shouted Walter. "That's right," agreed several voices. "But how can you help?" Dr. Michael stepped forward to explain. "You can help by giving official testimonies about the benefits of the water, and you can help by spreading this story to other people. The more people who know the truth, the harder it is for the company to get what they want in court." The meeting ended with everyone pledging to support Thomas in whatever way they could. The following week, a journalist from a regional newspaper showed up at the farm. Dr. Michael had managed to interest him in the story. "Mr. Thomas, tell me about the discovery of this water." Thomas told the whole story from the beginning, with simplicity and sincerity. The journalist also interviewed several people who had benefited from the water. When the article was published, it had an impact no one expected. The headline was, Simple man discovers medicinal water and fights company to keep public access. The story stirred sympathy among the regional population. People began calling the newspaper to show their support. Some local politicians spoke out publicly in favor of Thomas, but the Pure Waters of America company didn't stay idle. They hired a public relations firm and began spreading their version of the story, claiming that Thomas was putting public health at risk by allowing consumption of unregulated water. The battle intensified when the company obtained a court injunction prohibiting anyone from consuming the well water until the situation was clarified. Thomas had to put a chain on the farm gate and a sign, "Access prohibited by court order." It was one of the hardest days of his life. Mrs. Dorothy appeared crying, begging him to let her take just a little water. "Thomas, my son, I feel my diabetes coming back. Without the water, I'm going to get sick again." Thomas's hands were tied. "Mrs. Dorothy, I can't. If I disobey the court order, I'll go to jail, and then I won't be able to help anyone ever again." The situation became even more dramatic when the woman from New York returned with her son. The child had worsened again after they stopped drinking the water. "Mr. Thomas, please, my son is sick again. I beg you." Thomas felt like crying. He was seeing people suffer and could do nothing. It was Dr. Jennifer who brought a possible solution. "Thomas, I spoke with people from the state government. They are interested in creating a pilot project for a medicinal water source with public access." "How so?" "The state would take over administration of the spring, do all the necessary regulation, and guarantee free access for the population. You would keep ownership of the land, but the spring would be managed as public property." "And the company?" "If the state takes over administration, the company can no longer claim irregular exploitation, and they can't fight against the state government." It seemed like a good solution, but Thomas was suspicious. "And what's the catch?" "The catch is that you would lose total control over the spring. You'd have to follow government rules, accept inspections, allow scientific studies. But would people still have access?" "They would, even better than before, because there would be proper facilities to serve everyone safely." Thomas talked to Sarah about the proposal. "What do you think?" "I think we don't have much choice, Thomas. If we don't accept, the company might manage to take everything through the courts." "That's true. And if we accept, at least we ensure people will continue to be helped." Thomas decided to accept the state government's proposal. Dr. Michael prepared all the necessary documents, and within a few weeks the project was approved. The company, Pure Waters of America, was furious and tried to contest the decision, but had no legal arguments to fight against the state. 3 months later, the first public center for medicinal waters in New Mexico was inaugurated on Thomas's farm. The government built a small facility for service, with a medical office, waiting room, and water distribution system. Thomas was hired as the local coordinator of the center, with a salary that solved his family's financial problems. Sarah was hired as a service assistant. Dr. Jonathan was designated as the responsible physician, and Dr. Jennifer coordinated the scientific studies that definitively confirmed the therapeutic properties of the water. On Inauguration Day, Thomas looked around and saw hundreds of people who had come to celebrate. Mrs. Dorothy was there, looking great. Walter, John, Grace, the woman from New York with her recovered son. "Thomas," said Dr. Jonathan, "do you realize what you've accomplished? You turned a personal discovery into a public benefit." "Doctor, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just didn't want to deny help to those who needed it. Sometimes that's exactly what changes the world. Simple people who don't want to deny help." Thomas smiled, looking at the well that had changed his life. The water remained crystal clear, reflecting the blue sky of the southwest. But now he knew that water belonged to all who needed it. Sarah approached him. "Do you regret not selling to the company?" Thomas looked at Billy, who was playing with other children near the well. He looked at the people standing in an organized line to receive water. He looked at Mrs. Dorothy, who was talking animatedly with neighbors. "Regret? Sarah, just look at all this. We not only kept our land, but we also became part of a beautiful story. And the money the company offered. The money would have run out eventually, But this here, he said, pointing to all the activity, this here will last. In the afternoon, when the activity slowed down, Thomas sat on the edge of the well like he used to when he discovered the water. Dr. Jonathan approached. "Thomas, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Doctor." "What do you feel when you see all that has happened?" Thomas thought for a moment before answering. "You know, Doctor, I've always been a simple man. I worked, took care of my family, didn't bother anyone. When I became unemployed, I thought my life was over. And now I see that maybe everything happened for a reason. If I hadn't lost my job, I would never have come to clean this well. And if I hadn't cleaned the well, you would never have discovered the water." "Exactly. And look at how many people have been helped." "Doctor," Jonathan smiled. "Thomas, have you ever stopped to think that maybe your grandfather knew something about this water?" "What do you mean?" "Well, he left this land specifically to you, didn't he?" "Yes, he did. My uncles thought it was strange at the time because the land seemed worthless. Maybe it was worth more than anyone imagined." Thomas became thoughtful. He remembered some conversations he had with his grandfather when he was a child. The old man always said that land was special, but Thomas never really understood what he meant. "Doctor, I have an old box with my grandfather's things. I never really went through it because I couldn't read when he died. Do you think there might be something in there about the water?" "Let's take a look." Thomas went to the house and brought back a dusty wooden box. Inside were yellowed letters, old photographs, and some documents. Dr. Jonathan helped examine the papers. Most were in old Portuguese, difficult to understand. But in one of the letters he found something interesting. "Thomas, look at this. It was a letter his grandfather had written but apparently never sent. It was addressed to Thomas. My dear grandson, if you are reading this, it is because I have passed on and you have inherited our land. I know it may seem strange to leave you a piece of dry ground, but know that this land holds a secret our family has protected for generations. In the old stones near the big house, you will find water that heals. Our ancestors knew this but kept it secret because they feared people with bad intentions would take everything from us. Use this gift wisely, my son. Remember that what is given to help should not be used to get rich. Your great-grandmother once told me that this water sprang forth when the local Indians asked the heavens for help to cure their sick children. I don't know if it's true, but I know the water is good for those in need. Take good care of this, Thomas. One day you will understand why I left this responsibility to you." Thomas was moved reading his grandfather's letter. "Sarah, come see this." Sarah read the letter and was also moved. "Thomas, your grandfather knew. He always knew about the water. And he left all this to me because he knew I would do the right thing." Dr. Jonathan was impressed. "Thomas, this explains a lot. Your grandfather preserved this secret to protect the source until the right time came." "And the right time was now?" "Apparently so. Now that there is a legal structure to protect sources of public heritage, the water can benefit people without the risk of being exploited commercially." Thomas folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his shirt. "Doctor, I think my grandfather would be proud to see all this." "I'm sure of it." That evening, Thomas had dinner with his family at the ranch house. For the first time in months, he was completely at peace. The legal issues had been resolved, the family had financial stability, and the water was still helping people in need. "Dad," said Billy, "at school today the teacher told our story to the whole class." "And what did she say?" "That you're a hero because you didn't sell the land to the businessman." Thomas laughed. "Son, I'm no hero. I just did what I thought was right." "But Dad, doing what's right is sometimes being a hero." Sarah smiled. "Billy is right, Thomas. You could have sold it for a lot of money and solved our problems, but you chose to think of others too. And you don't regret it? All the trouble, all the worry?" Billy answered immediately. "Dad, remember the lady who came with her sick little boy? He was almost dying. Now he's playing and smiling. How could we regret helping him?" Thomas looked at his son with pride. At just 8 years old, Billy already understood values that many adults never learn. "That's true, son. It was worth it." "True, son." It was. A few months later, the Medicinal Water Center was already operating fully. People came from various regions of the United States for treatment. The state government was studying the possibility of creating other similar centers in different locations. Thomas had become a minor regional celebrity, being invited to give talks on preserving natural heritage and the sustainable use of water resources. At one of these talks, he met Dr. Harrison, a university researcher who was studying other medicinal water sources in the country. "Mr. Thomas, your story has inspired many other similar discoveries. There are people looking for old springs on their properties, and some have already found them." "Really?" "Yes. And the most interesting thing is that most are following your example. Instead of selling to companies, they are creating community centers." Thomas felt proud, but also responsible. "Doctor, am I creating too much expectation in people? Not every spring will have the same results." "Thomas, you created a model for how to use natural discoveries for collective benefit. That is far more valuable than the specific results of your spring." "How so?" "You proved it's possible to resist commercial pressure and create alternatives that benefit the community. That inspires other people to look for similar solutions to their problems." Thomas had never thought of his story that way. For him, he had just done what seemed right. At the end of the first year of the center's operation, a party was organized to celebrate. Hundreds of people attended, including many who had been helped by the water. During the party, Thomas was called to speak to the crowd. "Everyone," he began, still a bit nervous speaking to so many people, "when I discovered the water in this well, I never imagined it would go this far." The audience listened attentively. "I learned that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. I was unemployed, without prospects, thinking my life was worthless." Many people nodded their heads, identifying with him. "But I discovered that when you have something good, sharing makes it even better. If I had kept the water just for my family, maybe it wouldn't even have worked properly." "That's true," someone from the audience shouted. "That's why I want to thank each and every one of you. You were part of this story. Without you telling others, without you supporting us when things got tough, none of this would have worked." The audience applauded. "And I want to leave a message," Thomas continued. "If anyone here has something good that can help other people, don't keep it just for yourselves. Share it. It might be hard work, it might cause problems, but in the end it's worth it." When Thomas finished speaking, the audience gave him a standing ovation for several minutes. He looked at Sarah and Billy, who were in the front row, smiling proudly. "Doctor," Jonathan approached him after the speech. "Thomas, do you realize you've become a reference for a lot of people?" "How so, Doctor?" "There are people from other states who come here just to meet you and hear your story. You've become a symbol of resistance against corporate greed." Thomas felt a bit uncomfortable. "Doctor, I don't want to be a symbol of anything. I just want the water to keep helping those in need." "And that's exactly why you are a symbol, because your motivation is genuine." Later, when the party was ending and Thomas was cleaning up, Mrs. Dorothy approached him. "Thomas, my son, I want to tell you something." "Go ahead, Mrs. Dorothy." "Today marks exactly 1 year since I first drank the water from your well." "Really?" "Yes. And do you know what the doctor told me at my checkup today?" "What?" "That my diabetes is completely under control. He said he's never seen such a good recovery in someone my age." Thomas felt his eyes well up. "I'm very happy, Mrs. Dorothy." "Thomas, you saved my life. I was going to die slowly from that disease. Today I have the energy to take care of the house, to visit my grandchildren, to live." "You saved yourself, Mrs. Dorothy. I just offered the water." "No, my son. You offered hope. And sometimes that's what we need most." After everyone had left, Thomas walked to the well. The full moon reflected in the water, creating a beautiful spectacle. Sarah joined him. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how strange life is. A year ago I was desperate because I had no job. Today hundreds of people know my name because of a discovery I made while cleaning up this abandoned property. And are you happy?" Thomas thought about the question. "Yes, Sarah. Not happy like I imagined I'd be if I won the lottery, but happy in a different way." "How so?" "It's hard to explain. It's as if I found a reason to exist that I didn't know existed." Sarah smiled. Thomas, do you think if you hadn't discovered the water, our life would be worse? I don't know, it would be different. Maybe I would have found another job, we'd live a normal life. But now that I know I can help people, I can't imagine a different life. Even with all the problems we went through. Especially because of the problems. It was by facing the difficulties that I discovered what I'm capable of. And I discovered that there are many good people willing to help when the cause is just. Sarah agreed. During the months of legal struggle, they had met wonderful people who dedicated themselves to helping them without expecting anything in return. Thomas, what do you want to happen from now on? I want the center to keep running well. I want more and more people to be helped. I want Billy to grow up understanding the importance of helping others. And for you personally. Thomas thought for a moment. For me, I want to keep learning. Doctor, Jonathan said I could take a technical course in administration to manage the center better, and Dr. Jennifer talked about teaching me some things about geology. You want to study at 52? Why not? Now that I have a clear purpose, I want to be the best I can be at what I do. Sarah smiled. The husband she knew was hard-working and honest, but he had never shown interest in learning new things. The discovery of the water hadn't just changed the family's financial situation, it had changed Thomas's life perspective. The next day, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was a journalist from a national magazine who wanted to do a story about his story. Mr. Thomas, our magazine is interested in telling your story to the whole country. Would you agree to an interview? Thomas got nervous. Speaking to a local newspaper was one thing, but to a national magazine was very different. I don't know. What kind of interview? It would be a piece about stories of overcoming adversity and social entrepreneurship. Your story fits perfectly with the profile we're looking for. Thomas discussed the proposal with Dr. Jonathan. Thomas, it could be a good opportunity. If your story becomes known nationally, it could inspire other people and also bring more resources to the center. How so, resources? Organizations that support social projects might become interested in helping to expand the work, and the federal government might also want to create a national program based on the model you developed here. Thomas decided to accept the interview. The journalist spent 2 days at the homestead, talking with Thomas, Sarah, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Jennifer, and several people who had been helped by the water. When the article was published, 3 months later, the impact was enormous. Thomas began receiving calls from all over the country. People wanted to visit the center. Others wanted to share similar stories. Organizations offered support. One of the calls that impressed him the most was from a businessman from New York who had read the article. Mr. Thomas, my name is Richard Brennan. I own a medical equipment company. I read your story and was very moved. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Mr. Thomas, I would like to donate some equipment to the center. Computers, medical supplies, things that can improve the service. Thomas was surprised. He hadn't expected anything in return for the interview. Mr. Richard, that would be very good. But why do you want to make this donation? Because your story reminded me of my own father. He was also a simple man who always helped his neighbors when he could. Your attitude inspired me to use my financial success to help projects like yours. Richard's donation was just the first. After the report, the center received donations from various parts of the country. With the additional resources, it was possible to significantly improve the service structure. Thomas was amazed by people's generosity. He discovered that there were many Americans willing to help just causes. They just needed to know stories that inspired them. 6 months after the national report, Thomas received an unexpected invitation. The Department of Health wanted him to participate in a national meeting on alternative and traditional medicine. Thomas, explained the department employee over the phone, we want to present your center's model as an example of integration between traditional medicine and natural resources. But I don't understand anything about medicine. You don't need to. You understand community management and the sustainable use of natural resources. That's what we want to learn from your experience. Thomas traveled to Washington accompanied by Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Jennifer. It was the first time in his life he had left New Mexico. At the meeting, Thomas was impressed by the number of people interested in learning about the project. Doctors, researchers, public administrators, and representatives of traditional communities wanted to understand how the center worked. During his presentation, Thomas spoke with his usual simplicity. "Folks, I didn't discover anything revolutionary. I just did what any decent person would do. When I found something that could help other people, I shared it." "But Mr. Thomas," interrupted a researcher, "you created a management model that balances social benefit, environmental sustainability, and economic viability. That's not simple." "It may not be simple, but it's natural. When you truly want to help, you find a way to make it work." After the presentation, several people approached Thomas to talk. One of them especially caught his attention, a native woman from the Amazon named Shaman Elizabeth. "Mr. Thomas, your story reminded me a lot of my people's traditions. We always knew that nature offers healing to those in need, but we also know these gifts must be used with respect." "How so, Shaman?" "You instinctively understood something my ancestors taught. What the earth gives to heal cannot be turned into a source of greed. It must be shared with wisdom." Thomas was moved by the shaman's words. "Shaman Elizabeth, my grandfather left a letter saying the indigenous people of our region asked the heavens for help to heal sick children, and that the water sprang forth because of that. Do you think that could be true?" "Thomas, we indigenous people know that nature responds to people's true needs. If the water sprang forth when there was a need for healing, and if it continues healing to this day, it's because the people who care for it have pure hearts." The shaman's words touched Thomas deeply. He began to understand that his story was part of something much larger than he had imagined. On the flight back home, Dr. Jonathan commented, "Thomas, did you realize the impact of your speech today?" "Not really. Why?" "Several people came to me afterward, asking for information on how to create similar projects in their regions. You planted a seed that may bear much fruit." "I hope so, Doctor. It would be good to know other people can be helped because of our experience." When they arrived home, Thomas found a surprise. Billy had prepared a poster saying, "Welcome, Family Hero," and stuck it on the front door. "Billy," laughed Thomas, "how many times do I have to say I'm not a hero?" "Dad, you may not be a hero to everyone, but you're a hero to me, and to Mrs. Dorothy, and to John, and to Grace, and to hundreds of people you've helped." Thomas hugged his son, moved. "All right, son, if you say I'm a hero, then I am." Sarah watched the scene, smiling. "Thomas, you've changed a lot since discovering the water." "How so?" "You're more confident, more determined. Before you did things because you had to. Now you do them because you want to." It was true. Thomas felt an energy and motivation he hadn't known before. Each day working at the center was an opportunity to see lives being transformed. 1 year after the meeting in Washington, the Department of Health launched a national program for community centers of traditional medicine based on the model developed at Thomas's site. The program planned to create 50 similar centers in different regions of the country. Thomas was invited to be a consultant for the program, traveling across the country to help other communities implement their own centers. On one of these trips, he encountered a story that deeply marked him. It was a community in rural Oklahoma where there was a mineral water spring known locally for generations, but which was being contested by a mining company. "Thomas," said the community leader, "when we heard your story, we decided we wouldn't sell our spring. We want to do just as you did." Thomas spent a week in the community, teaching everything he had learned about community organization, legal issues, and natural resource management. When he left, the community was organized and determined to create its own center. 6 months later, Thomas received a photo in the mail. It was the inauguration of the Oklahoma Community Center, with a plaque thanking the inspiring Thomas Carter Wilson. "Sarah, look at this," showed Thomas, moved. "Wow, they did it." They sure did. And you know what makes me happiest? They did it their way, with the characteristics of their community. They didn't copy, they were inspired. That was exactly what Thomas hoped for, that his story would inspire others to find their own solutions, not to copy exactly what he had done. In the following years, Thomas received news from dozens of communities that had created similar projects. Some worked with medicinal plants, others with mineral water sources, others with traditional healing knowledge. The most important thing was that they all followed the same principle, using natural resources for collective benefit, resisting commercial pressure, and maintaining public access. Thomas became a national reference in community-based natural resource management. Universities invited him to give lectures. Researchers wanted to study the model he had created. Politicians sought him out for advice on public policies. But what made him most proud was seeing the direct impact on people's daily lives. The center at his property had already served more than 10,000 people from all over the United States. Many returned regularly to continue treatment. Others came once and were completely healed. Dr. Jonathan, who continued as the physician in charge of the center, documented hundreds of cases of significant improvement in chronic diseases. Scientific studies confirmed that the water truly had exceptional therapeutic properties. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after the discovery of the water, Thomas was sitting on the porch of the old house on the property, watching the activity at the center. There were organized lines of people waiting for care, families having picnics in the recreation area that had been built, children playing on the donated equipment. Billy, now 13, worked as a volunteer at the center on weekends, helping to guide visitors. "Dad," he said, approaching, "do you remember what it was like here when you discovered the water?" Thomas smiled. "Yes, I do, son. It was just brush, dirt, and silence. And now look at all this. It's impressive, isn't it? Sometimes I have trouble believing all this started with me cleaning a well. Dad, do you think all this happened by chance?" Thomas thought about his son's question. "I don't know, Billy. Maybe not. Your great-grandmother always said the important things in life happen when we're ready for them. And were you ready? I think so. I was in a difficult situation, without a job, without prospects. That left me open to accept changes I might not have accepted if I'd had a comfortable life." Billy nodded, thoughtful. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to keep taking care of the center." Thomas was moved. "Are you sure, son? It's a big responsibility." "I'm sure. I grew up seeing how much good it does for people. I want to be part of this story." "Then you'll study hard, right? To better understand how everything works." "I will. Dr. Jonathan already said he can teach me about medicine, and Dr. Jennifer talked about teaching me geology." Thomas looked at his son with pride. Billy was growing up with solid values, understanding the importance of helping others and taking on responsibilities. Sarah joined them on the porch. "What are you two talking about?" "Billy was saying he wants to keep taking care of the center when he grows up. That's wonderful. That way the story will stay in the family." Thomas hugged his wife. "Sarah, you don't regret anything that happened?" "Regret?" "Thomas, our life has improved in every way. We have financial stability. Billy is growing up with good values, you found a purpose, and on top of that, we've helped thousands of people. But sometimes I wonder if you wouldn't prefer a simpler, quieter life." "Thomas, before discovering the water, our life may have been simpler, but it wasn't quiet. You were always worried about money. I was always worried about Billy's future. We had no prospects." It was true. Thomas remembered the anguish he felt during the months of unemployment, the feeling of uselessness, the constant worry about the family's future. "Now," Sarah continued, "we have purpose, we have dignity, we have the satisfaction of knowing our work makes a difference in people's lives." That night, Thomas did something he hadn't done in a long time. He walked alone to the well to give thanks. He didn't know exactly to whom or for what he was giving thanks, but he felt the need to express his gratitude. The water remained crystal clear under the starlight. Thomas knelt at the edge of the well, as he had done the first time he cleaned it. "I don't know if anyone is listening," he said softly, "but I wanted to thank you for everything that has happened, for the opportunity to help so many people, for the strength my family had to face the difficulties, for the good people we met along the way." He stayed silent for a few minutes, just listening to the sounds of the night in the southwest. "And if my grandfather was right about the Indians who asked the heavens for help to heal the sick children," he continued, "I promise I will take good care of this water for as long as I live. And I will teach Billy to take care of it too." When he returned home, Thomas found Sarah still awake. "Where did you go?" "I went to give thanks." "Give thanks to whom?" "I'm not sure, but I felt I needed to give thanks." Sarah smiled and hugged him. "Thomas, you are a good man, and I am proud to be your wife." The next day, Thomas received a call that moved him deeply. It was Lucy, the woman who had come from Roswell with her sick daughter 5 years ago. "Mr. Thomas, it's Lucy. Do you remember me?" "Of course I remember. How is your daughter?" "Victoria is great. She's 10 now and completely cured. The doctors say there's no more sign of the kidney disease." Thomas felt his eyes well up. "That's wonderful news, Lucy." "Mr. Thomas, I call every year on the day I first brought Victoria there to give thanks, but this year I wanted to share some special news." "What is it?" "Victoria has decided that when she grows up, she wants to be a doctor to help other sick children. She said she wants to heal people, just like the water from Mr. Thomas's place healed her." Thomas couldn't hold back the tears. "Lucy, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Mr. Thomas, Victoria's story is the story of hundreds of families. You didn't just save bodies, you saved dreams, you saved futures." After hanging up, Thomas kept thinking about Lucy's words. It was true that the discovery of the water had changed much more than just people's physical health. It had restored hope to desperate families. It had inspired children to dream of a better future. It had shown communities that it was possible to resist greed and create caring alternatives. A week later, Thomas was visited by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to make a film about the history of the center. The project had been approved by a public grant for cultural promotion. "Mr. Thomas, we want to tell your story in a way that inspires other people to believe in the possibility of social change." Thomas agreed to participate in the documentary, but he set one condition. The film should show not only his personal story, but also the stories of the people who were helped by the water. "Director, I'm not the important one. What's important are the lives that were transformed. That's what should be in the film." The filmmaker spent 2 months filming at the center, interviewing Thomas, Sarah, Billy, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Jennifer, Mrs. Dorothy, and dozens of people who had benefited from the water. When the film was finished a year later, it was shown at film festivals across the country and won several awards. But what made Thomas most proud was knowing that the film was being used in schools to teach about citizenship and social responsibility. "Dad," said Billy after watching the film, "it's weird seeing our family in a movie." "It is weird, son, but if our story can teach something to other people, it's worth it." "What do you think people learn from our story?" Thomas thought about the question. "I think they learn that any ordinary person can make a difference in other people's lives, that you don't need to be rich or famous or have a lot of education to contribute to the world, and anything else, that when we find something good, sharing multiplies the good. If I had kept the water just for our family, it would have benefited 3 people. By sharing it, it benefited thousands." Billy smiled. "Dad, have you ever thought about how many people know our story today?" "I have no idea, son. From the news reports that came out, the invitations you receive, the letters that arrive here, it must be millions of people." It was an impressive idea. Thomas, a simple man from the interior of New Mexico, had his story known by millions of Americans. "You know what impresses me the most, Billy? It's that people identify with our story. I get letters from people all over the country telling similar stories, talking about discoveries they've made, about how they decided to help other people. So our story became inspiration for other stories." "Exactly. And that is much more important than fame or recognition." 10 years after the discovery of the water, Thomas was invited to receive an honor at the state legislature of New Mexico. He would be awarded the Medal of Merit for his contribution to the social development of the state. At the ceremony, Thomas wore the same suit he had bought to marry Sarah 25 years earlier. It was a little tight, but he insisted on wearing it. "Why that suit, Thomas?" asked Sarah. "Because it was wearing these clothes that I promised to be a good husband and father. Today I'm receiving this honor because I managed to keep that promise in a way I never imagined." At the ceremony, Thomas gave an emotional speech. Honorable representatives, authorities, friends who came from far away to be here, I want to say that this medal is not mine. It belongs to every person who believed in our story, who supported our struggle, who benefited from our discovery. The audience applauded. When I discovered the water in that well, I didn't know I was discovering much more than a medicinal spring. I was discovering that an ordinary person with goodwill and determination can change the lives of thousands of other people. Thomas paused, emotional. Today, after 10 years, I can say that the most important thing I learned is that good only multiplies when it is shared. If each of us looks for a way to help other people, the world becomes better for everyone. When Thomas finished speaking, the audience stood up and applauded for several minutes. Among the people applauding were Mrs. Dorothy, John, Grace, Walter, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Jennifer, and hundreds of other people who were part of the story. Billy, now 18 and studying medicine in Phoenix, was in the front row next to Sarah. "Mom," he whispered, "do you have any idea how many lives were changed because of Dad's discovery?" "I don't, son, but I know it was many. I did some research at the university. Just counting the people who were directly treated at our center, it's over 15,000. And that's not counting their family members, the communities inspired by our story, the projects created based on our model." Sarah was impressed. 15,000 people. "And Mom, there's something that makes me even prouder." "What?" "Of all those 15,000 people, not one paid a cent for treatment. Dad managed to keep access completely free all these years." It was true. Despite all the pressures and commercial offers, Thomas had managed to maintain the principle he established from the beginning. The water would always be free for those who needed it. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Thomas spoke with various authorities and people who had come to honor the tribute. One of the conversations that marked him most was with a young doctor who had just graduated. "Mr. Thomas, my name is Rebecca. I graduated today from the State University of New Mexico, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what, doctor?" "Because your story was one of my inspirations for choosing medicine. When I was 15, I watched the documentary about the center and decided I wanted to help people just like you do." Thomas was moved. "And now that you've graduated, what do you plan to do?" "I want to work in community medicine. I'm going to do a family medicine residency, and I want to work in underserved communities." "That's wonderful, doctor. The country needs doctors who think like that." "Mr. Thomas, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Have you ever regretted not selling the land to the company and becoming rich?" Thomas smiled. "Doctor, I may not have become rich in money, but I became rich in purpose, rich in satisfaction, rich in gratitude. And I discovered that this wealth is much more lasting than money." "How so?" "Money can run out, it can be stolen, it can lose value. But the satisfaction of knowing I helped thousands of people, no one can take that from me. And that satisfaction grows every day instead of diminishing." The conversation with the young doctor made Thomas reflect on his choice. In 10 years, he had received purchase offers reaching millions of dollars. Multinational companies wanted to turn the water into a commercial product for worldwide sale. But Thomas always refused, maintaining his commitment to public and free access. "Rebecca," he added, "there's one thing I've learned all these years." "What?" "When you do something out of love, out of a genuine desire to help, the return you receive is much greater than when you do it for financial interest." "I believe that. And there's another thing. When you act with generosity, you attract generous people. In these 10 years, I've met hundreds of wonderful people who dedicated themselves to helping the project without wanting anything in return." It was true. Thomas had built a network of friendships and partnerships based on shared values. Doctor, Jonathan continued working at the center, even though he had better offers at private hospitals. Dr. Jennifer maintained her research at the source without any additional pay. Dozens of volunteers dedicated their weekends to help with patient care. On the trip back home after the ceremony, Thomas, Sarah, and Billy talked about the future. "Dad," said Billy, "I was thinking about something." "Go ahead, son." "When I graduate from medical school, I want to propose an expansion of the center. create a technical course in natural medicine to train people from the region. Thomas liked the idea. Explain it better. The idea would be to teach people in the community about medicinal plants, natural therapies, first aid. That way, each community would have trained people to help with simpler health problems. And the center would be what? It would be a practical school where these people would learn, and also a referral place for more complicated cases. Thomas was impressed with the maturity of his son's proposal. Billy, that's an excellent idea. I'll talk with Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Jennifer about the possibility. And Dad, there's something else I wanted to propose. What? I want us to document everything that has been learned in these 10 years, the history of the center, cases of healing, management methods, partnerships established, a manual that can be used by other communities. Sarah smiled proudly. Billy, you're thinking just like your father, always wanting to share knowledge. Thomas hugged his son. Son, you make me very proud. I see you've understood the spirit of what we do here. Dad, I grew up seeing how much good a discovery can generate when it's well used. I want to multiply that. Arriving home, Thomas went to the well as he always did after long trips. It was his ritual of gratitude and renewal of energy. The water remained as crystal clear as on the first day. Around the well, there was now a medicinal garden maintained by visitors, with therapeutic plants from various parts of the United States. Another day, another story, he said to the water. Thank you for continuing to help everyone in need. As he was heading back home, Thomas saw a scene that moved him deeply. A group of visiting children was playing around the well, supervised by their parents. One of the children, about 5 years old, looked at the water and said, Mummy, will this magic water cure my cough? It's not magic, sweetie, the mother replied. It's special, and yes, it can help with your cough. Thomas smiled. Over all these years, he had explained hundreds of times that there was nothing supernatural about the water, that the therapeutic properties had a scientific explanation, but he understood why. Especially for children, the experience seemed magical. The following week, Thomas began working on the manual that Billy had suggested. With help from Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Jennifer, he organized all the knowledge accumulated over the 10 years of the center's operation. The manual included history of the discovery and first steps, legal issues and how to resolve property conflicts, scientific aspects, and how to conduct water analyses, community organization and participatory management, partnerships with universities, government and organizations, financial sustainability of social projects, documentation of cases, and outcome studies. When the manual was ready, 6 months later, it was over 200 pages long. Thomas decided to make it freely available online and also to print copies for distribution in libraries and universities. Dr. Jonathan, said Thomas, handing him the first printed copy, do you think this can help other communities? Thomas, this manual is worth more than many academic books I know, because it's based on real, successful, practical experience. And it's written in a simple way that anyone can understand. Exactly. Thomas, you all have created very valuable knowledge about community management of natural resources. Sharing this is another important contribution to the country. The manual had an impressive impact. Within 3 months, it had been downloaded over 10,000 times from the internet. Universities began using it as teaching material in environmental management and social development courses. Thomas received letters from dozens of communities that were applying the manual's knowledge to create their own projects. One of the letters that moved him the most came from a Maroon community in Alabama. Mr. Thomas, our ancestors always knew that the river that flows here has special properties for treating skin problems, but we never knew how to organize it properly to help more people. After reading your manual, we created our own association, and now we serve over 300 families a month. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Sarah, Thomas showed her the letter. Look at this. That's beautiful, Thomas. Your story is helping to preserve the traditional knowledge of other communities, too. It was something Thomas hadn't foreseen, that his experience could be useful not only for new discoveries, but also for valuing and organizing ancestral knowledge that was being lost. 15 years after the discovery of the water, Thomas turned 65. To celebrate, the community organized a big party at the center. Over 1,000 people attended, including all local authorities, university representatives, members of communities that had been inspired by the story, and hundreds of people who had benefited from the water over the years. During the celebration, a special documentary produced by Billy, now a medical school graduate and community medicine specialist, was shown. The film showcased 15 years of the center's history through testimonials from people who had been part of the journey. One of the most emotional parts was the testimony of Victoria, the girl who had arrived at age 5 with severe kidney problems and was now a 20-year-old medical student. "Mr. Thomas changed my life when I was a child," she said in the film, "but he's still changing my life today because he inspired me to want to help other people just like he helped me." Another memorable testimony came from Mrs. Dorothy, now 83 years old and still in excellent health. "Thomas didn't just discover medicinal water," she said. "He discovered that sharing goodness multiplies everyone's happiness." At the end of the celebration, Thomas gave an emotional speech. "My friends, when I discovered the water from this well 15 years ago, I was just an unemployed man trying to clean up an abandoned property." The audience listened in silence. "Today, I see that discovery changed not only my life, but the lives of thousands of people. And it changed in a way I could never have imagined." Thomas paused, looking at the hundreds of familiar faces in the audience. "But what makes me happiest isn't the recognition or the honors I've received. It's knowing that our story has inspired other people to look for ways to help their communities." "That's right," someone shouted from the audience. "So I want to leave a special message for the young people here today," Thomas continued. "You don't need to discover a source of medicinal water to make a difference in the world. Each one of you has something special that can be used to help other people." Billy, who was filming the speech, smiled proudly at his father. It could be a talent, knowledge, a skill, an opportunity. What's important is being willing to share the good you have. The audience began to applaud, but Thomas signaled for them to wait. "And I want to leave another message. Never give up on doing what's right because it seems hard. When I discovered the water, many people said I should sell it quickly to a company and get rich. But my heart told me that wasn't right." "You did the right thing," shouted John from the pottery shop. "Doing what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it, because at the end of life, what remains is the good we've done for others." When Thomas finished his speech, the audience gave him a standing ovation for over 5 minutes. Many people were crying with emotion. Sarah approached him and whispered, "Thomas, do you realize you've become a moral reference for this entire region?" "How so?" "When people have doubts about important decisions, they ask, what would Thomas Carter Wilson do in this situation? You've become an example of integrity and generosity." It was a responsibility Thomas hadn't sought, but one he accepted with humility. Later, as the celebration was winding down and Thomas was helping organize the cleanup, a young college student approached him. "Mr. Thomas, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my dear." "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you hadn't discovered the water?" Thomas thought about the question. "Sometimes I do. I probably would have found another job. We'd have lived a normal life without any big surprises." "And would that have been bad?" "It wouldn't have been bad. It would just have been different. But now that I've lived this experience, I can't imagine a life without purpose." "What is the purpose?" "To use the good we have to help other people, to show it's possible to resist greed and create alternatives based on solidarity." The young woman smiled. "Mr. Thomas, I study journalism and I want to write stories that inspire people. Your story is one of the most inspiring I've ever known. I'm happy if I can inspire someone, but remember, everyone has their own story to write." When everyone had finally left and Thomas was alone at the ranch, he took his nightly walk to the well. It was a ritual he had kept for 15 years, even when traveling or sick. That night, he stayed longer than usual, watching the water under the starlight. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years since I cleaned this well and everything changed. He thought of all the people who had been helped, all the friendships built, all the lessons learned, all the difficulties overcome. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for everything." The next day, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was a representative from an international organization that worked with sustainable development projects. "Mr. Thomas, my name is Marcus Weber. I represent the Global Foundation for Community Development. We are based in Switzerland." Thomas was curious. "How can I help?" "Mr. Thomas, we learned of your story through our contacts in the United States. We would like to invite you to participate in an international meeting on community-based natural resource management." "Where would it be?" "In Geneva, Switzerland. The meeting will bring together representatives from similar projects all over the world." Thomas was astonished. He had never imagined his story would reach so far. "And what would you like me to do there?" "We want you to share your experience. We have similar projects in Africa, Asia, Latin America, but the model you developed is considered one of the most successful in the world." Thomas talked to Sarah about the invitation. "Thomas, you have to go. It's a unique opportunity to learn how other cultures solve similar problems, but I don't speak other languages." They said there would be simultaneous translation. "And Thomas, think about what you can learn there and bring back to improve our work here." Thomas decided to accept the invitation. It would be his first international trip. In Geneva, Thomas was impressed by the diversity of projects presented. There was a representative from Kenya who had organized a medicinal plants cooperative, a woman from India who created a water purification system using traditional methods, a group from Peru that preserved ancestral knowledge about sustainable agriculture. During his presentation, Thomas spoke with his usual simplicity, but the impact was profound. The translators struggled to convey some typically American expressions, but the content clearly reached the listeners. After the presentation, Thomas was surrounded by dozens of participants wanting to talk. One who impressed him most was a young man from Senegal. "Mr. Thomas, my country has problems similar to the United States. Foreign companies want to exploit our natural resources and leave little for the local communities." "And how do you deal with that?" "We are still learning. That's why I came here to seek inspiration from stories like yours." Thomas realized the problems he had faced in the United States were repeating in many parts of the world, and that successful experiences of community resistance were valuable globally. On the last night of the meeting, Thomas attended a dinner where each representative told a significant personal story from their work. When it was his turn, Thomas told the story of Victoria, the girl who had arrived at the center at 5 years old with kidney problems and was now studying medicine. "That girl taught me something very important," said Thomas, "that when we help a child, we are not just curing an illness, we are creating a better future for the world." The audience fell silent, moved by the story. "Victoria told me she wants to be a doctor to help other sick children. That means our water didn't just heal her, but it will heal dozens of other children through the work she will do." A woman from Norway commented, "Mr. Thomas, this is what we call a multiplier effect. One good deed generates other good deeds on an increasing scale." Thomas liked the expression. "Exactly. That's why I believe sharing always multiplies the good." During the flight back to the United States, Thomas reflected on everything he had learned at the meeting. He discovered that his story was known in various parts of the world and served as inspiration for communities facing similar challenges. But most importantly, he learned new forms of community organization and sustainable management that he could apply to improve the center. "Billy," he said upon arriving home, "I need to tell you everything I learned in Switzerland." "How was it, Dad?" "It was incredible. I discovered that our problem with greedy companies happens all over the world, but I also discovered that there are organized communities resisting on every continent." "And did you learn new things?" "I learned several participatory management techniques we can apply here, and I saw environmental preservation systems that can help better protect our spring." In the following months, Thomas implemented several improvements at the center based on what he learned in Geneva. A community council was created with representation from all groups that used the water. A stricter environmental monitoring system was implemented. An environmental education program for visiting children was developed. The improvements had a very positive impact. The center became even more organized and efficient, and the local community felt even more engaged in the project. 2 years after the trip to Switzerland, Thomas received another international invitation, this time for a meeting in Costa Rica on sustainable tourism based on natural resources. The invitation came because the center had become a model for developing sustainable health tourism that benefits the local community without degrading the environment. "Sarah," Thomas said, showing the invitation, "it seems our story is becoming an international reference. Thomas, do you realize the responsibility this represents?" "How so?" "Many people around the world are looking at what we do here as an example. We have to keep doing everything right so as not to disappoint these people." It was true. Thomas felt the weight of the responsibility to maintain the standards of excellence that had made the center a reference. In Costa Rica, Thomas presented the center's management model to representatives from 23 countries. This time, Billy accompanied him, now graduated and working as the center's medical coordinator. "Dad," Billy said during the meeting, "do you see how our story has grown?" "It's impressive, son. When I cleaned that well, I never imagined it would go this far. And Dad, there's one thing that makes me very proud." "What?" "After almost 20 years, our fundamental principles have never changed. We still offer free treatment, we still maintain community management, we still prioritize environmental sustainability." Thomas smiled. "Son, that happens because from the beginning we established clear values. When you have solid values, external pressures can't steer you off the right path. And what are our fundamental values? Solidarity, sustainability, transparency, and inclusion. Everyone in need has access. We take good care of the environment. We are accountable to the community for everything we do, and we include all people in the project's management." In his presentation in Costa Rica, Thomas spoke about the importance of maintaining ethical principles even when there is pressure to commercialize special natural resources. "Gentlemen," he said, "for 20 years, my family has received offers reaching tens of millions of dollars to sell our medicinal water source." The audience was impressed by the amount. "We always refused because we believe some things are more valuable than money. The health of underprivileged people, environmental preservation, community cohesion, the moral example for future generations." A representative from Mexico asked, "Mr. Thomas, how do you manage to resist such great financial temptations?" "It's simple. Every time I receive an offer, I go to the center and talk with the people being served. When I see a sick child being healed, a humble family regaining hope, an elderly person returning to a quality life, I remember why we are doing all this. And that's enough, more than enough. It gives me absolute certainty that I am on the right path." After the presentation, Thomas was approached by several representatives wanting to see the center in person. "Mr. Thomas," said a representative from Colombia, "our organization would like to bring a group of community leaders to learn about your work." "They will be welcome." "And Mr. Thomas, would you be willing to go to Colombia to help us develop a similar project?" Thomas became interested. "Tell me more about the project." "We have an indigenous community that preserves a water source with properties similar to yours. They want to create a community center, but they are facing pressure from mining companies." "I understand. That's exactly the situation we faced here at the beginning." "Exactly. That's why we want your guidance. Your experience could help our community a lot." Thomas accepted the invitation. It would be an opportunity to give back all the help he had received over the years. In Colombia, Thomas spent 2 weeks working with the indigenous community. He taught community organizing techniques, legal issues regarding natural resource ownership, sustainable management of medicinal springs. "Mr. Thomas," said the community chief, "your experience is being very valuable to us, but we want you to know that we are also teaching you things." "How so?" "You are learning about our ancestral knowledge of nature preservation and community management. It's an exchange of knowledge." It was true. Thomas was learning a lot about traditional environmental preservation and social organization techniques that he could apply at the center in the United States. When he returned from Colombia, Thomas implemented several practices he had learned from the indigenous community. The center became even more sustainable and efficient. "Billy," he said, Every trip I take teaches me something new that improves our work here. Dad, that's what happens when you share knowledge genuinely. You teach and learn at the same time. Exactly. And I've discovered that communities all over the world face similar challenges and can learn from each other. At 70 years old, Thomas decided to write a book telling his whole story. It would be a way to organize all the learnings and experiences of the last 20 years. Sarah, what do you think of the idea of writing a book? I think it's great. Your story can inspire even more people if it's told completely. Thomas began writing with the help of a journalist specialized in biographies. The process took 2 years because Thomas insisted on including not only his own perspective, but also testimonies from dozens of people who participated in the journey. The book, titled The Water of Hope, A Story of Solidarity and Resistance, was published simultaneously in the United States and other Latin American countries. The response was extraordinary. The book became a bestseller in the United States and was translated into several languages. Thomas began receiving invitations to speak at universities and international meetings. But what made him most proud was knowing that the book was being used as teaching material in social development and community management courses. "Billy," said Thomas, flipping through a copy of the book, "can you believe our story became a book?" "Dad, your story deserved to become a book a long time ago. It's a story of courage, determination, and generosity that can teach people a lot. What makes me happiest is knowing the book can help other communities facing similar situations. And Dad, there's one thing that catches my attention in the book." "What?" "You always give credit to other people. You never present yourself as a lone hero. You always make it clear that everything was the result of collective work. Because it truly was, son. I only discovered the water. Everything that happened afterward was built with many people working together." It was a defining characteristic of Thomas. Even though he was internationally recognized as a community leader, he always made sure to share the credit with everyone who participated in building the project. When Thomas turned 75, the center was serving over 1,000 people per month. It had become the main health tourism destination in the Southwest and generated employment and income for hundreds of families in the region. Billy, now 40 years old, officially took over the direction of the center, allowing Thomas to dedicate himself more to international consulting activities and writing. "Son," said Thomas on the day of the official transfer of leadership, "I am very proud to hand this project over to your hands. Dad, I will continue everything you built. The fundamental principles will never change. I'm sure of that. And son, remember, the important thing isn't to keep everything the same, it's to keep the spirit of solidarity and innovation. I understand. I will keep looking for ways to improve the service and expand the project's impact." Under Billy's direction, the center gained new dimensions. A research program in integrative medicine was created in partnership with universities. A technical course in natural therapies was developed, which has already trained over 500 people. An exchange network with similar projects in other countries was established. Thomas watched all the innovations with pride and satisfaction. He saw that the project not only continued to grow, but also evolved according to contemporary needs. "Sarah," he said one afternoon, watching the activity at the center, "do you believe everything that has happened in these 25 years? Sometimes it feels like a dream, Thomas. From an unemployed man cleaning an abandoned well to an international reference in community management. And the most impressive thing is that the water keeps flowing in the same quantity and with the same quality as always. It's as if it knew it would be well taken care of." Thomas smiled at his wife's comment. "Sarah, there's something I want to ask you." "Go ahead." "Do you regret anything we did along this journey?" Sarah thought before answering. "Thomas, it was a difficult journey. We had moments of a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of work, but we also had satisfactions we would never have experienced otherwise. And the final result? The final result is that we built a life with purpose, helped thousands of people, created a legacy for our son and for our community. How could I regret anything?" It was true. Despite all the difficulties, the journey had been extraordinarily rewarding. At 80 years old, Thomas remained active, traveling the world as a consultant on community development projects. He had advised the creation of similar centers in 15 different countries. On one of these trips, this time to Morocco, Thomas heard a story that deeply moved him. It was a Berber community that had a water spring with medicinal properties known for centuries, but which was being threatened by a French mining company. "Mr. Thomas," said the community leader, "we know your story from the internet. We want to apply the same model you developed in the United States. I will help you in the best way I can." Thomas spent a month in Morocco, working intensively with the community. He taught organizing techniques, legal resistance strategies, and sustainable management methods. As he was leaving, the community leader told him, "Mr. Thomas, you gave us the tools to protect our spring, but you gave us something even more valuable." "What?" "You gave us the certainty that it is possible to resist powerful companies when the community is united and has a just cause." Thomas was moved. "That certainty you already had. I only helped you organize the resistance better." "Mr. Thomas, your story proved to us that ordinary people can defeat multinational corporations when they fight for the right principles." On the flight back to the United States, Thomas reflected on the global impact of his story. In 25 years, he had directly or indirectly helped more than 50 communities around the world protect their natural resources and create sustainable projects. When he arrived home, Sarah was waiting for him with special news. "Thomas, while you were away, a very special letter arrived." "From whom?" "From the United Nations." Thomas opened the letter with curiosity. It was an invitation to receive an honor for his contribution to global sustainable development. "Sarah, is this serious?" "Yes, it is. You have been chosen to receive one of the 5 annual UN medals for community leaders." Thomas was speechless. He never imagined he would receive recognition from an international organization of that magnitude. "And Sarah, there's something else in the letter." "What?" "They want to include our story in a global educational program about sustainable development." It was an immense honor, but also a great responsibility. Thomas's story would be taught in schools all over the world as an example of community resistance and sustainable natural resource management. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The ceremony at the UN was one of the most emotional moments of Thomas's life. He was in the same room where world leaders make decisions that affect billions of people, receiving recognition for a story that began with him cleaning an abandoned well. During his speech at the ceremony, Thomas spoke to representatives from 193 countries. "Ladies and gentlemen, 30 years ago I was just an unemployed man in the interior of the United States. Today I am here representing thousands of people who believe it is possible to build a more just and sustainable world." The audience listened attentively. "My story proves that anyone anywhere in the world can make a difference when they have the courage to share what is good and the determination to resist greed." Thomas paused, moved to be speaking in that setting. "Gentlemen, each of the countries represented here has communities facing pressures similar to those my family faced. Companies wanting to exploit natural resources without benefiting local populations. People being expelled from their lands. Traditional knowledge being lost." Several representatives nodded in agreement. "My message is, it is possible to resist. It is possible to create alternatives. It is possible for communities to control their own resources and use them for collective benefit." When Thomas finished his speech, he received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Representatives from various countries approached him after the ceremony to talk about similar projects in their countries. "Mr. Thomas," said the representative from Mozambique, "your story inspires us greatly. We would like to invite you to visit some communities in our country that are facing similar situations." Thomas accepted the invitation. At 82, he still felt the energy and drive to help communities in need of guidance. In Mozambique, Thomas worked with 3 different communities that possessed special natural resources, one with a medicinal water source, another with rare therapeutic plants, and a third with traditional sustainable farming techniques. "Mr. Thomas," said one of the community leaders, "you are teaching us that our wealth isn't just in the resources we have, but in how we organize them to benefit everyone." Exactly. Natural resources exist all over the world. The difference lies in community organization and ethical management. When he returned from Mozambique, Thomas brought back more knowledge about African community management techniques that were incorporated into the center in the United States. "Billy," he said, "every trip teaches me something new. It's amazing how different communities find creative solutions to similar problems." "Dad, do you realize you've become a bridge between communities all over the world?" "How so?" "You take knowledge from the United States to other places, and bring knowledge from other places to the United States. You're creating a global network for exchanging experiences." It was true. Thomas had become a facilitator of knowledge exchange between communities on different continents. At 85, Thomas decided to write a second book, this time focused on the lessons learned from his travels around the world. The book, titled Waters of the World, Stories of Resistance and Global Solidarity, documented the experiences of 50 communities Thomas had visited or advised in 25 different countries. "Sarah," said Thomas, showing the finished manuscript, "this book is a global mapping of community resistance." "How so?" "Each chapter tells the story of a community that found creative ways to protect its natural resources and create sustainable development." "And what do these stories have in common?" "They all started with ordinary people who decided not to accept unfair exploitation of their resources, and they all achieved important victories through community organization." Thomas's second book had an even greater impact than the first. It was adopted as a textbook in university sustainable development courses in more than 30 countries. International organizations began using the stories documented in the book as examples of best practices in community development projects. "Thomas," said Dr. Jonathan, now 83 and still active at the center, "do you realize you've become one of the world's leading documentarians of community resistance experiences?" "I never thought of it that way, Doctor." "But that's exactly it. Your travels, your books, your lectures are creating a historical archive of how communities around the world manage to protect their resources and create sustainable development." "And what is that for?" "It serves to show future generations that organized resistance works, that it's possible to face powerful corporations and win when the cause is just and the community is united." At 90, Thomas still received invitations for lectures and consultations, but he decided to reduce international travel and focus on his work in the United States. "Billy," he said in a conversation about the future, "the time has come for me to spend more time here and less time traveling." "Dad, you can continue contributing through video conferences and other means." "True. Technology allows me to keep advising projects without needing to travel so much." Thomas adapted quickly to new technologies. He began giving consultations via the internet to communities all over the world, participating in virtual conferences and guiding projects remotely. He discovered that technology allowed him to reach even more communities, including some in very remote regions where it would be difficult to go in person. "Sarah," he said one afternoon, "it's amazing how technology multiplies our ability to help." "How so?" "Yesterday I gave a consultation to a community in Nepal in the morning, participated in a meeting with leaders from Mexico in the afternoon, and in the evening I spoke with researchers from Australia. All without leaving home." "Thomas, you've become a global digital consultant." Thomas laughed at the expression. "Who would have thought that one day I would be a digital consultant? But the important thing is that people are still being helped." At 92 years old, Thomas received the news that the center had served over 100,000 people since its creation. A big party was organized to celebrate the historic milestone. 100,000 people, said Thomas during the party. "When I discovered the water from that well, I never imagined it would reach that number." The audience, made up of hundreds of people who had been helped over the years, applauded emotionally. But what makes me proudest isn't just the number. It's knowing that each one of those 100,000 people returned to their community, carrying not just health but also hope and an example that it is possible to create alternatives based on solidarity. Thomas looked at the audience and saw familiar faces from every decade of the center's history. Mrs. Dorothy, now 98 years old and still in excellent health. Victoria, now a doctor for 20 years and working in community medicine. John, Grace, Walter, hundreds of other people whose lives had been transformed. You know, I always say I'm not a hero, but today I want to say that you, each one of you who supported this project over the years, you are the true heroes of this story. Emotion swept through the audience, because a discovery only becomes important when it is shared, and you were the ones responsible for spreading our story, for bringing other people in, for defending our project when it was threatened, for keeping alive the values that guided everything from the beginning. When Thomas finished speaking, the audience stood for an ovation that lasted more than 10 minutes. Several people were crying with emotion. After the party, Thomas took his nightly walk to the well, as he had done for more than 30 years. But this time, he was accompanied by Billy and his 2 grandsons, Billy's sons who were now 15 and 12 years old. "Grandpa," said the older grandson, "tell us what it was like here when you discovered the water." Thomas looked at the well, now surrounded by a beautiful garden and protected by a structure that preserved its quality without preventing access. "My grandsons, when I cleaned this well for the first time, it was all weeds and abandonment. But when I saw the crystal clear water, I knew I had found something special." "And did you already know it would turn into all this?" asked the younger grandson. "No, my grandson. I only knew that water could help sick people. The rest happened as we learned and grew." "Grandpa, what was the hardest part of this whole story?" Thomas thought about the question. "The hardest part was resisting the temptation to sell the land and get rich, especially during the times when we were facing legal problems and weren't sure if we could keep everything." "And what gave you the strength to resist?" "Seeing people being helped. Every time I saw a sick child getting better or an elderly person regaining their dignity, I remembered why we were fighting." The grandsons listened attentively. They were growing up immersed in their grandfather's story and absorbing his values from a young age. "Grandpa," said the older one, "when I grow up, I want to keep taking care of the center." "Me too," added the younger one. Thomas smiled, moved. "My grandsons, you can choose any profession you want. The important thing is that you never forget the values you learned here: solidarity, honesty, determination, and generosity. Grandpa, you can be sure we'll never forget." On their way back home, Billy commented, "Dad, your grandchildren are absorbing the spirit of the project perfectly. It's a great satisfaction, son, knowing that the values will be passed on to the next generation. And Dad, there's something I want to tell you." "Go ahead." "I'm organizing a foundation that will systematize and perpetuate all the knowledge developed here over these 30 years. Thomas became interested. How would it work? The foundation would have several fronts: consulting for new communities, research in integrative medicine, education in sustainability, documentation of similar experiences. And would it be independent from the center? It would complement the center. The center would continue serving people, and the foundation would focus on multiplying the knowledge." Thomas thought the idea was excellent. "Son, that would ensure our experience continues to be useful, even after we're no longer here." "Exactly. And Dad, I've already spoken with several universities and international organizations. They all showed interest in supporting the foundation. It was a smart way to ensure the continuity and expansion of the impact of the project created by Thomas. At 95 years old, Thomas saw the foundation created by Billy already fully operational. It was advising the creation of similar centers in 15 countries and had systematized methodologies that were being applied by hundreds of communities. "Billy," said Thomas one afternoon, "you achieved something I never could." "What, Dad?" "Transforming our experience into systematized knowledge that can be replicated anywhere in the world." "Dad, I just organized what you created. All the knowledge came from the practical experience you developed." "But organizing knowledge so that other people can use it is a very important skill, son." It was true. Billy had managed to transform Thomas's intuitive and practical experience into scientific methodologies that could be taught and applied systematically. On his 96th birthday, Thomas received a special tribute. A delegation of 50 community leaders from 25 countries came to the United States specifically to meet him and thank him for everything he had taught. "Mr. Thomas," said the delegation coordinator, "all of us here are leaders of projects that were inspired or advised by you. We came to thank you in person." Thomas was deeply moved. "My friends, you didn't have to come from so far away, but I am very happy to meet you in person." For 3 days, Thomas spoke individually with each of the leaders, learning their stories and about the local adaptations they had made to the methods he had taught. "It's impressive," Thomas commented to Sarah, "to see how each community adapted our methods to their own cultural and environmental characteristics. Thomas, that proves you created universal principles, not ready-made recipes." "How so?" "The principles of community organization, ethical resistance and sustainable management that you developed work in any culture, but each place finds its own way to apply those principles." It was a very insightful observation. Thomas had created not a rigid model, but flexible principles that could be adapted to different realities. At the end of the international delegation's visit, a meeting was organized where each leader presented their project to the others. Thomas was impressed by the creativity and diversity of solutions. "Gentlemen," he said in closing, "you taught me today that community resistance has 1,000 different faces. Each culture finds its own way to protect its resources and create fair development." "Mr. Thomas," replied a leader from Peru, "but the fundamental principles are the same ones you taught: community unity, transparency in management, collective benefit above individual profit." "That's true, and that makes me happy because it means there are universal values that unite people from all over the world." At 98 years old, Thomas still maintained his clarity and energy, continuing to give virtual consultations and write articles about community development. One Sunday afternoon, he was sitting on the porch watching the activity at the center when Sarah approached. "Thomas, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "After everything we've lived through, everything we've achieved, what is the thing that makes you most proud?" Thomas thought for a long time before answering. "Sarah, the thing that makes me most proud is knowing that our story proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have the right values and determination." "And what else?" "That we managed to show the world that it's possible to resist greed and create alternatives based on solidarity. That is very important in a time when many people think there's no way out." "Thomas, do you have any regrets?" Thomas smiled. "Sarah, if I could go back in time and make the decision again, I would do exactly the same thing. It might have been difficult at times, but it was the right thing to do. And if you were to give advice to someone starting a similar struggle, I would say, never give up on your values, even when it seems there's no way out. Find people who think like you and work together, and always remember that sharing good multiplies everyone's happiness." It was the synthesis of an entire life dedicated to building alternatives of solidarity. On the day Thomas turned 100, an international celebration was organized. Representatives from all continents sent messages of congratulations and gratitude. The center received hundreds of visitors who came specifically to honor him. During the party, Thomas gave what would be his last public speech. "My friends, reaching 100 years is a blessing not everyone receives, but reaching 100 years knowing I lived a life with purpose is an even greater blessing." The audience listened, moved. "When I discovered the water from that well, I was 52 years old and thought my life no longer had much value. Today, at 100 years old, I can say the last 50 years were the most meaningful of my existence." Thomas paused, looking at all the dear people who were there. "So my final message is, it's never too late to discover your purpose in life, and it's never too early to start helping other people." When Thomas finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. People of all ages, all nationalities, all social classes present at the party spontaneously embraced, creating a wave of emotion and human connection that lasted several minutes. "Dad," whispered Billy into Thomas's ear, "you managed to unite people from all over the world through your story." Thomas smiled with tears in his eyes. "Son, people were already ready to unite. Hai just offered a story that reminded them of what they have in common. 3 months after turning 100, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep, after a normal day of work, giving virtual consultations to communities in Africa and Latin America. His funeral became an international celebration of life and the values he represented. Over 10,000 people from 60 different countries came to the United States to say goodbye. The center was declared a National Cultural Heritage Site, and the foundation created by Billy officially assumed the mission of perpetuating and expanding the work started by Thomas. Sarah, at 98 years old, continued living at the homestead, tending the medicinal garden that surrounded the well and receiving the families who came seeking treatment. "Grandma Sarah," said one of Thomas's great-grandchildren, "do you miss Grandpa?" "I do, my grandson. But he continues here in a different way." "How so?" "Every person healed by this water, every community that applies the methods he taught, every young person inspired by his story to help others, all of that is Grandpa Thomas continuing to live." It was true. Thomas had died physically, but his legacy kept growing and multiplying around the world. 5 years after his death, there were already over 200 projects in 50 countries applying methodologies developed from the experience Thomas had created in the desert of New Mexico. The original center continued to serve 1,500 people a month. The water from the well maintained the same quality and therapeutic properties as always. Billy, now 65, had become a world authority on sustainable community development, always citing his father's teachings in his lectures and consultations. Thomas's grandchildren, trained in medicine and administration, took over the direct management of the center, implementing new technologies and methods, but strictly maintaining the fundamental principles established by their grandfather. "Dad," said Billy, speaking to a photo of Thomas on his office wall, "you managed to create something much bigger than a treatment center. You created a worldwide movement of ethical resistance and community solidarity." That was exactly what Thomas had achieved, transforming a personal discovery into a global movement for social change based on generosity, sustainability, and resistance to predatory exploitation. 10 years after Thomas's death, the United Nations officially created the Thomas Carter Wilson Award for Sustainable Community Leadership, awarded annually to leaders who excel in creating solidarity-based development alternatives. The first award was given to a Quilombola leader from Alabama who created a medicinal plant center following the methods developed by Thomas. "Mr. Billy," she said during the ceremony, "receiving an award named after your father is the greatest honor of my life. Your story changed not only the lives of thousands of people, but changed how the world thinks about community development. It was the definitive recognition that Thomas had achieved something extraordinary, transforming a local experience into a global paradigm. 15 years after his death, the story of Thomas Carter Wilson was being taught in schools in over 80 countries as an example of ethical leadership and sustainable development. His life had proven that ordinary people, with the right values and determination, can create extraordinary changes that transcend generations and borders. The water from the well he cleaned continued to flow crystal clear, healing people and inspiring communities around the world to believe that a more just and caring future is always possible. And so, the story of the poor man who found something unbelievable in the well of an abandoned farm became a worldwide legend of hope, resistance, and love for one's neighbor. His discovery proved that life's greatest riches are not material, but spiritual. The satisfaction of helping those in need, the joy of seeing communities thrive, the certainty of having lived a life with purpose. Thomas Carter Wilson had turned water into hope, dry land into oases of solidarity, and an abandoned inheritance into an eternal legacy of generosity. End of story. So, dear listener, what did you think of this incredible story of Thomas Carter Wilson? Would you have the same courage to resist millions to keep a public good? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and which part of the story moved you the most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories that life teaches us. Thank you so much for your company.